Great. So next up, I'm just going to let people move around for their sessions. So next up for this session, some exciting news on our Workflow Manager that will be presented by Jay and Dimitris. We also have coming up later on the stage. And you don't have any limitations on questions, so that Christian had. So please hit them with a lot of questions.
Thank you very much. So great to be here, everyone. I am an architect for the Crosswork Workflow Manager. My colleague Dimitri will join us shortly. And today we'll be talking about Crosswork Workflow Manager. Now we will be releasing 2.0 very soon, next week, end of this month. So the idea is that we'll show you some of the features that we've added as part of the 2.0 release. And at the same time, hopefully towards the end of the session, you'll have some more information about CWM, kind of features that we're adding, direction we're going in. And hopefully, if you have any questions, we can also answer those at the same time. Now, before I go into what's coming up, I thought it was important to just go and talk about the journey so far. We started CWM just over 2 years ago. Why did we do this? So, NSO is great. There's a lot of great things. But whenever, I used to be part of the NSO pre-sales team before, and every time we went to the customers, there was always a question about, how do we translate our orders into NSO services? How do we deal with the operational aspects? If you wanted to have some kind of manual user input, I wanted to do an approval. I want to double check the dry run output from NSO. So these are some of the challenges that Workflow can solve. So about 2 years ago, I was here in Stockholm and we announced 1.0 for Crosswork Workflow Manager. Now, the workflow product itself is based on the serverless workflow specification. So we have the concept of a DSL, a domain-specific language. It's coming from the serverless workflow specification. It is a vendor-neutral, open-source initiative, community-driven, and is tailored to define and execute basically your workflow definitions. It is hosted by CNCF, so the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and provides a set of tools that you can use to design and create your workflows. The initial release also provided a simple UI for some administrative tasks. So we have the concept of adapters, which I'll come to in a minute. So you could manage your adapters, install your adapters. You could do the operational aspects in terms of track your job progress. And at the same time, we introduced the adapter SDK. Now, one of the key things that we need from Workflow is the ability for it to integrate into many different systems. Every customer we talk to has their own set of systems. Some might be custom off the shelf, some might be homegrown. They will have different interfaces. And rather than trying to say that we support some of these things out of box, which would be not scalable, we worked very hard to provide an SDK. So the idea is that we want to empower the developers, we want to empower our customers, including CX as well, to go and build these integrations into your ecosystem without having to rely on us, not have us being the bottlenecks, and that you can go and quickly build these integrations yourself and then leverage the power of the workflow. So we've spent a lot of time and effort in developing the SDK, and in the first release we included an adapter for NSO and also a generic REST adapter. In 1.1, we enhanced the support for the specification, so you had the ability to create child workflows. We enhanced the specification, so if you had a for each loop, you were looping through a set of devices, you could execute them in parallel or sequential. You could decide how you wanted to execute those workflows. You had the concept of retry policies, so if you wanted certain activities to be retried for a certain period of time, you might want to have an increasing delay between the retries. All of those are configurable. You could have compensation, so in the event there's a failure, what should I do? Should I undo some resource allocation, for example? We introduced event handling as well. So as part of the event handling, we support right now Kafka, AMQP, HTTP-based events. Currently, these are based on the Cloud Event Specification, which is another initiative from the CNCF. And we also enhanced some things in terms of tag support. So we have tags on workflows and jobs. So if you're executing a new job, you can put your name as a tag, so you can search for it simply. You can have a ticket ID, some numbers. You can define all that when you're executing the job. And at the same time, we introduced the concept of tags on the adapters. So in CWM, we can support multiple versions of adapters that they can run in parallel. So if you have a new system or a new version, the APIs have changed, you can install both versions of the adapters and run them in parallel. And then over time, migrate your workflows to start using the newer systems and then retire the old ones. And on the back of that, you can also have this concept of default or latest. So you can say, well, this is my default adapter. So if you have a workflow defined for a single version and that's your default version, it will always use that default version, but whilst you're testing, you can also create a new version that uses the latest. So you have this way where it saves you having to go, if you have 10 workflows looking at a specific version, you don't have to update all those 10 versions. You can just update the default tag to point to the new versions and saves you updating the workflow. There's scheduling support now added as well in 1.1, so you can have a regular job that runs and does a sync from your network, for example, on a nightly basis. It gives you a report. It gives you, okay, these devices are off sync. What do you want to do? And then the other thing we introduced is the concept of an XDK. So with 1.0, there was the SDK, and you can go and create your own adapters. But we also know that for certain tools and technologies, an example is NSO and the generic REST. We wanted the ability to make it easier for you to consume those services that you created. So with every customer, the YANG models that you go and create on NSO are different. So we've created the XDK where you can basically take the XDK, point it to the YANG models that you have, and it auto-generates an adapter that you can then use inside the workflows without having to write a single line of code. Similarly, for the generic REST, we have something which will you can point it to a Swagger documentation or an open API spec, and it will automatically generate all the integration points, all the adapters, the activities that you can then reference in your workflow. So again, the idea is to reduce the amount of time it takes for you to create these integrations for well-defined systems. 1.2, released earlier in the year, last year, we introduced the concept of guided tasks. So one of the key, again, features for workflows is the ability to pause the workflow, have interaction with your operators, and being able to do the dry run or approval. So with the 1.2 release, that was the key feature that was introduced. At the same time, we also introduced a form designer, which is a drag and drop designer where you can design these forms so that they can be customized to the look and feel that you want. Some other enhancements included input validation, where you can make sure you can create a schema to say this is the input for the workflows, and it will validate the inputs. You can have timeout policies. There was enhanced error handling, where you can have different layers. It's like a hierarchical errors. You could have a generic error that might just be HTTP, or it might be, okay, if it's a 401 unauthorized. So you can reference the level of error that you wanted to detect, and based on that, take the relevant actions. And then tag propagation. So when you create a workflow or a job and you've given a tag, it will automatically pass those tags to the child workflow, so you can then trace all of those and see all the workflows that were created from the parent. So this is where we've got to so far. That's our journey. And now we go on to 2.0. So what are the key features? What are the key things that we're introducing? So the first one you will see is the workflow navigator, and you will see this when Dimitri comes on the stage. When 1.0 came out, all the workflow was written as code, as a JSON document. Now, there are various reasons for that. We have some customers who in the past have had graphical user interfaces, and when you get into a complex workflow with 50, 100 activities, trying to update that with clicking in different places can become cumbersome. So this allows you a way to just go, in the text, do find and replace, edit this quickly. But at the same time, not everyone has those technical capabilities. So we know that the visual element of this is also very important. So you will see the enhancements that we made onto the platform. And eventually, this will go into a full drag and drop designer in the upcoming releases. You can associate forms to the workflows. So you can have them as inputs. We have the concept of worker profiles and dynamic workers. I'll show you. I'll go into more of that in the next few slides. And also configurable settings that can drive the policy of your workflows. What should be my default timeout policy? What should be my default retry policies? So all of these are now configurable that you can now, an administrator can go and change. And the biggest change is that we are now on the Crosswork platform. So Crosswork Workflow Manager can now be deployed alongside CNC inside the Crosswork infrastructure. On the back of that, you get support for HA if you were deploying this in CNC cluster, for example. We also have the option of deploying this in single VM, support for smart licensing, and there are various other things that we get for free because we're part of the CNC ecosystem. So this is a screenshot for the navigator. You can see that we have the code editor that we had before, but now there is a visual representation of the diagram. Right now, this one is not fully interactive, so you can click on each of those states or the actions, and it will go to the correct place in the UI editor, so in the code editor. And as I said, the plan is that this will become fully interactive with a drag and drop designer. So if you didn't want to do the code, you can just work on the graphical designer. But in case of CWM, we want to support both, right? It's the best of both worlds. If you prefer to go to code, you can. If you prefer to work from a designer aspect, you can also. Forms as inputs. So before in the previous version, all input was as JSON payload. But here you are able to assign a form. And then when you create a new job, that form is rendered for you. And this form is, again, user definable. So a workflow designer can design this form and associate that with the workflow. Worker profiles and system settings. So here you can see some of the default timeouts that we have. And then the workers. So the concept with workers is when we have adapters, they run in a separate process. And these processes will be a different pod, and you can select how much CPU memory you want to assign for that. So this allows you to make sure that if a certain task or set of activities in your workflows was going to be more CPU intensive, you can optimize that deployment to make sure that that's going to have the relevant resources allocated to that. So this was another major feature that was introduced with CWM 2.0. So now I'm going to introduce Dimitris, so bringing together the various pieces. And we will go into the workflow itself.
Can you hear me? Welcome, everyone. You probably haven't seen an entrance like that before. Some cable. So let me get started. Move forward. So the intent is to show you a demo that's going to run approximately around 20 minutes in total. We're not going to wait for things to happen because it's bringing up some devices in the back end. But what you will actually see is the ability that we have with the Crosswork Workflow Manager to interface with a number of systems. So we do have, obviously, a northbound RESTful API that all your BSS OSS systems can engage with the Crosswork Workflow Manager. And as Jay mentioned earlier, we have a set of adapters that allow you to connect the product to your infrastructure. Now, obviously, we're tightly integrated with NSO, and anything that has to do with, service activation, devices, etc., we prefer to go through the NSO path. But as you can understand, in the context of a use case that is broader beyond the scope of NSO itself, you'll probably need integrations with other systems as well that are in your environment. And it might be, as I mentioned, your OSS BSS system. It might be an IP address management system. It might be approval systems that you have in your environment, or documentation, billing, whatever it needs to facilitate your use case. We have adapters to cater for that type of integration. So you see me mentioning that you can talk to controllers, you can talk to devices, you can talk to applications that are outside the scope of NSO, probably other applications. If your toaster has an API, we can talk to your toast and it creates a toast for you while you're waiting for the job to be finished. So in the demo, there's a couple of integrations that you see on the right-hand side. There's ServiceNow. We're going to be using ServiceNow as the BSS system where we're going to be making an entering an order for rolling out a new device for one of our customers. We have integrations with Mail and the WebEx system to send notifications, and we can also integrate with a Kafka bus to post asynchronously messages that can be produced and consumed by your other systems in your environment. So what we have today for you. there will be an order that's initiated, and that will start from ServiceNow. There will be notifications sent, because although somebody might be, sitting in front of the workflow manager, accepting these tasks as they come in, most likely they will be not there. So we will send some notifications to email clients, to WebEx teams, etc., so they get notified that something has come in as a new order. There will be an approve process. So an operator that typically will sit in front of the workflow manager will have to look at this type of order that has come in. Is it something that I agree to? Is it the right time to deploy this type of service? But as you can understand, this is very generic to probably many use cases that you have in your organizations that need some type of approval. In this case, it is the CWM operator, but again, through those notification mechanisms, these can be forwarded to anybody in your organization that needs to have a say on what gets done and when. Oh, sorry. The other things that, so we mentioned the approval, we mentioned the notifications. The idea of this particular use case is that we're rolling out a device, as I mentioned, and this usually entails somebody taking a box, going to a customer site, plugging in, etc., and then being able to notify the workflow manager, the Crosswork Workflow Manager, that that part of the job has been completed. So the workflow then can trigger some additional actions that are relevant to the activation of that device. In our case, it's pushing some bootstrap configuration, making sure that the device is available for the rest of the systems to engage with it and make it part of the broader network environment. So typically the network engineer, what will do, he will go on site, install the device, and then acknowledge that installation with some type of device details. It will be the serial number and probably some of the things that it needs to provide to the workflow so the workflow can continue its job. As I mentioned, device configs will be delivered, notifications will be sent, and at some point you'll close the flow itself. This is just a small representation of the workflow. It's far more evolved. I want to mention at this point that we do have a booth outside, so what you see here will be available at the booth as well if you want to come and get more details, and we can discuss, again, in more detail, anything that you would like to see. So at this point, I think we'll go back and we're ready to switch to my PC. Now, I will start by saying that, I don't know if you noticed, I was in the corner. I was praying to the demo gods. So please take a time and pray with me. Thank you. So, what you see here is the dashboard of the Crosswork Workflow Manager. You'll notice those that have used our products, whether it's NSO, whether it's the Crosswork Network Controller, we're converging the UI, so this is pretty similar to any of the product that you will get out of our organization. So who sits in front of the dashboard? Typically anybody that needs to engage with the Workflow Manager. So an administrator will be more interested in looking at things like how many workflows are running at this point of time, how many adapters do I have in my system that need attention, activity tasks. The developer will be looking at workflows as well. The operator will be looking at tasks. Now, I do have an impression that this must have timed out, so let me just quickly do. You see, the gods don't like me. So I've been disconnected from the network. Unfortunately, I cannot dance. I cannot perform songs for you. Oh, we might be back. I apologize for this, but give me a second. I'll see whether my VPN connection is coming back online. And it did. So we might be in a good case. After all, let's refresh this, and we're back. I hope you liked my song. It was called Silence. Now, let me go ahead. So we looked at the dashboard. Obviously, here, as I mentioned, it's where your users will log on. You will see the various dashboards that you can create. This is fully customizable. I won't go through the settings. I'll just briefly show it to you. There's a number of topics that you can touch. Again, you can come to the booth for more details. Some of those were shown during the slides. There is two main menu components, operate, and again, that's the place where operators will spend most of their time, and we do have the design portion where you will see workflows and forms. What I will do now, though, we'll come back and revisit this, is I will go to Service now and initiate a new order. Now, you'll notice that the two top customers are called soft drinks and medium drinks. So you can understand that I'm going to go now for hard drinks after this. So this is hard drinks customer. And I spelled that wrong. And he's somewhere. And again, I spelled that wrong. So what happens here? Again, imagine BSS system, somebody puts an order through. This is a very simple form, but the intent of this is to trigger a workflow in Crosswork Workflow Manager. So that is fired away. If I come back to the Workflow Manager and I look at my dashboard, I'll notice now that I have one task available to me. You'll notice it down here on the screen. But I did promise you that apart from that, I will get email notifications. So if I refresh the email that is logged out, of course, there's the email notification. And this goes to show you that you don't have to sit in front of CWM. We have the ability to push all these notifications to your teams so they get notified as workflows come in. So going back to the flow, we triggered a ticket from our BSS system. We received that notification within CWM. And at this point, the operator or somebody else within the organization will review the task that awaits for him. There's some content here that is very specific to the service. You can see inside there's the ticket numbers, the customer that ordered it probably, whether there's going to be notifications sent left and right, etc. We will accept this order. So the operators decide to confirm this order coming in and submits it. What happens at this point? At this point, the workflow will now send additional notifications. And you can see them again here if I was to refresh the email client. There should be an addition. It's the first onboarding, but on the right-hand side on the WebEx Teams, you can see that there's been a post on that particular WebEx Teams. This is, again, theoretically the area where your field engineer might be listening to incoming requests. So he gets some details that you need to perform this new device onboarding. We could have included the rest of the information, customer details, where to go, so on and so forth. But the idea is that he has to perform some type of action, and he has to engage a robot. And this is what he will typically do. Once he's deployed the device, he will engage this mechanism that's available on WebEx. It could be a different mechanism, it doesn't really matter. But what this will in essence do is it will allow him to enter some details. And let me just copy that because that's the serial number of the device. It will allow him to enter the details that are very specific to the device that the workflow is expecting as input data in order to proceed with the execution of the customization. So again, you can see here it's been prompted. The engineer has been prompted with a number of fields to fulfill. So that's the serial number, that's the device ID. Actually, in this case, we're doing a Junos. We're deploying a Junos device, and the record was pushed above, so let me just quickly copy that. So upon submission, in essence here now the field engineer is validating that the device has been connected, has been configured, and the workflow should continue with executing the various activities that it needs to fulfill the onboarding process. I will get an acknowledgement from the system letting me know that the device has been onboarded successfully with status 200. More emails will come in. We'll revisit those in a second. Now, I'll quickly switch to a screen where I am capturing the device at the time of boot. So what you see here is actually a device that's in the booting stage. The configurations will be deployed onto a DHCP server that will take care of the bootstrap configuration. There's the additional device. Forgive me for scrolling around so many screens, but there are so many touch points in this workflow. Let me just start the process for the DHCP server because that was interrupted also by the infrastructure. Okay, and let that go ahead and do its job. We will revisit this because this will take a number of minutes. I might deplete all my time here. But in essence, what happens here is that the device now boots. It will receive instructions from the workflow manager of where to receive the bootstrap configuration, so on and so forth. In the meantime, we can go back to the Crosswork Workflow Manager and we can discuss some of the topics that Jay showed to you earlier. So let's start from the design menu where we have our workflows. And this is the library of the workflows that you will deploy in your environments. These are very specific to the use case that I'm showing to you. You as developers will create your own workflows to cater for your needs. Let me just quickly show you what one typically looks like. You have some very generic details about the workflow. We will go into the designer, which in essence gives you access to the DSL code, the domain-specific language, the service local language on the left-hand side, whereas on the right-hand side, you can see a graphical representation of the workflow itself. You have the ability to change themes. Here you can zoom in and out. You can focus only on the graph if you wish to. You can focus on the code of the particular workflow. So this is typically what developers will be doing. They will be designing workflows. They will be using this environment, again, to design the workflow, to validate the workflow, and get a graphical representation. The editor here is very dynamic, so it does a number of things for you. First of all, it will check for lint syntactical errors, like in this case, since it's a JSON structure, it tells me that I've introduced an error somewhere in the screen. More than that, it also has the access to the DSL itself, to the serverless workflow specification. So it will auto-prompt the developer of the applicable actions that you can introduce at this particular section where you reside within the workflow. And finally, once you've introduced whatever changes you want in this environment, there is a validation button that will take care of all the things that you've done and make sure that this workflow, if it's referencing other workflows, they exist in the environment. So all in all, it is a complete environment for you to author and develop your work tasks. As I alluded to just now, you have the ability to create very generic, specific workflows that can be leveraged by parent workflows to perform particular tasks in your environment. In our case, this set of workflows includes email notifications and the WebEx notifications, but not limited to that. Let's look at the form section. The form section is something that's been introduced since the version 1.2. It's been enhanced with 2.0, and it basically gives you the ability to design forms either to provide information to the operator or to solicit information from the operator. One example of the forms was the approval form that you saw at the very beginning of the execution of the workflow. The operator was notified that there's a new task coming in. He engaged the task, the form was deployed, it showed him some information, and all it requested from him was just an approve, whether to confirm or deny the actual request. The forms can be far more elaborate, so they can basically capture information. So when you engage one of the forms that you will be designing, automatically it goes into preview mode, so it shows you what this form looks like. You have the ability to define fields as mandatory. You can have regex expressions behind these fields. So if I enter something that is wrong, the system will tell me that this is not applicable value for this particular field. That way, you can create forms if you don't use an OSS BSS system and you want to drive these type of interactions from the environment itself. You can design forms that will be presented to the users at the time that they instantiate, the time that they execute a workflow. From a designer perspective, what you just saw is you get a graphical environment where you can drag and drop elements onto the form. go into each and every element and customize it. Basically what you would find in a modern form designer is available to you out of the box using CWM. And again, this will facilitate the use cases where you want to entice users to either provide some information or to perform some type of validation of what the workflow is doing for you. Let's look at jobs. At this point of time, we're actually looking at jobs that are still running within the workflow, and they're related to the task that I triggered earlier. So this is all about instantiating the device, rolling out that device, posting configurations. This is somewhat a time-consuming activity, and it will take place to complete. Hopefully, it will complete within the time frame that I have. If not, you can always come outside and we can run the demo again for you. What is important here at the job manager is that you're looking at jobs that have either completed, are in running state, as you can see here. They have failed for whatever reason in your environment. Whenever you want to find additional details about a job, you just navigate over the particular job that you're interested, and it will give you all the activities that it has performed in order to fulfill that particular workflow. At the very top, you can look at the input of that workflow and what it has produced as output of the workflow. And we can discuss again this more in detail if you need to, but basically the Workflow Manager gives you the ability for each and every activity to control what type of data goes in, what type of data goes out. A workflow is typically an execution of a series of activities where the output of one activity can become the input of the following activity, so on and so forth. And it also obviously exercises some logic. So from the Jobs Manager, you have complete visibility into what steps were executed and what was the input and output that was passed along between those executions. If we look at one that has failed, let me just quickly pick this up as an example. Again, it will highlight the areas where the activity failed, and you can open that activity up and look into the error that caused it. Again, this is not, might not be meaningful at this point of time, but you do have the ability, again, to look at each and every activity as it was executed as part of the workflow. The tasks, you saw me leveraging that earlier. Anything that requires the attention of the user will land in as a task, and they will have to engage with that particular activity. And let's quickly go back to workflows. One of the things that I wanted to show you here is that if I want to engage a new workflow, all I have to do is go to the right-hand side of the workflow itself, click Run, and you can see here that I can provide tags for this particular job. So we have tags at two places. We have tags at the workflow level, and you can tag your workflows either because of a use case, that you've been working on, and these are utilities. This is a utility that you can use basically to search your workflows at any point in time. And in a similar manner, you will do the same thing when you're executing a workflow. It's instantiated as a job. It will inherit the tags from the workflow itself, but you can provide your own here, again, with the intent to use these for some type of query that you can access in the future. Any workflow typically requires some type of input, some type of payload. This is again in JSON format. There are workflows that don't necessitate that because of their integrations, they can fetch all this, from their integrations that they will perform. And from an execution perspective, you can run this particular job ad hoc at this point of time. You can schedule it for any date and time in the future, or you can put it as a repetitive task to activate at some type of cadence, whether it's once a day, once a week, once a month. Again, that is very specific to the type of workflows, the type of use cases that you want to facilitate. There's nothing else that I would like to show to you from the UI perspective, so let's quickly look back at the jobs and hopefully we'll see whether the one that we've instantiated has completed. No, it's still in process. But let me just quickly talk you through what would be the outcome once this complete. You can see some of the tasks that have already executed and completed, but right now at this point of time, it's polling that device to make sure when it's ready to complete the workflow. Once that happens, it will come back to ServiceNow and update the corresponding task that was executed, that was instantiated, with the information about whether it has, what time it actually completed, and what was the outcome of the particular order. Here you can see a order that's been canceled. Why? Because the operator decided that he's not going to approve that particular task. There are others that are still in dispatching mode and they're still being executed. We don't have any more additional emails, but again, once the workflow completes, you will get a final notification here at the email system. You will also get a final notification on the WebEx environment as well. And I have 2 minutes, so maybe it's a good time to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions. So Matthias Holman is wondering, does Workflow Manager support integration with Git for developing and visioning the workflow code?
Not directly, but I mean, these are just text files that you can export and download. So right now you can do that just manually. There are ideas and plans on the roadmap, but I will say our PLM, Lou Mandito, is around. So Lou, I don't know if you can raise your hand. You here? Yeah. So yeah, he's at the back there. So please do speak to him. But there are ideas on this, but nothing committed on the roadmap.
Thank you. So next questions. Can you create workflow based on BPMN files?
No, unfortunately not. So everything we do right now is based on the serverless workflow specification. So that's the only thing we do, we support. We can look into, seeing what the workflow is doing and then trying to recreate that, but there isn't a migration tool or just support for BPMN.
All right. So I hope I say this correctly. We are using Camunda. Is that right? Camunda workflow for day 0 and trigger day 1 in NSO. What are the advantages of CWM compared to Camunda?
That's a good question. So I haven't been that hands-on with Camunda. I know that it's based on the BPMN notation. What we can say is from a CWM perspective that right now our aim is to try and make it very easy to integrate with other systems. So, we have the ecosystem in terms of the SDK and the XDK, where you can easily do automatic integrations. You've got the form designers here, which is part of the actual ecosystem as well. And then with the XDK, where you can easily just create these adapters and then plug them into the system. So some of the advantages here is the ease of integration into NSO and kind of the generic REST-based systems. Also, this system has been designed from the ground up based on Kubernetes. It's very scalable, high throughput. So, there might be some performance advantages that you will also get using a system like CWM.
I would also add to that, if you don't mind, Jay, the fact that CWM is based on the service workflow specification, and that is something that's been adopted by the industry by large. So most of the cloud providers use that specification in their own workflow solutions. So from an interoperability perspective, from an adoption perspective, I would, take that as an advantage with CWM.
Thank you. Can you tell us more about AAA and RBAC capabilities in CWM?
Sure. So right now we have basic RBAC capabilities in the sense that we support the RBAC at the API level, which is coming from the underlying infrastructure. Since we've only migrated onto this infrastructure right now, it's limited to the APIs. And then on the roadmap is the more fine-grained RBAC capabilities where you can then decide, okay, a given user can only execute a certain workflow. So right now it's based on, you can decide which a given user can either create workflows or not create workflows. A given user can execute jobs or not execute jobs, or install adapters or not install adapters. And the plan is on the roadmap to then give you more fine-grained control to say, well, a given user can only create a certain type of adapters or only execute a certain type of jobs. So there is some more work to be done there, and we have that on the roadmap.
So final question, I hope it's a short one. Can you make new nodes with customer functionality?
I'm not sure what you mean by new nodes, but I think I'll try and interpret that question, and if not, please do find me outside, and I'll try and answer the question you're asking. But one of the things is you can create new adapters, and you can install these adapters at any point in time. So using the adapters is based on Golang, And then once you install the adapters, you can create what we call the workers, which are the profiles, where you can decide, okay, I want to allocate certain number of CPU, memory, and you can create as many workers as you want as well, based on the capacity you have inside the virtual machine when you deploy. So you have both of those options, but yeah, the idea is that we want to allow you to go and integrate into custom functional technologies or systems very easily, and then it's very easy to deploy that using the SDK.
Thank you, Jay and Dimitris, for this presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.